Hi, writers. Today, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite writing tools, which is the Inside Outline. The Inside Outline is part of the Blueprint for a Book system that Jennie Nash has developed. And Jennie Nash is the CEO of Author Accelerator. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Sarah Gentry, and I am an Author Accelerator certified book coach. So it should come as no surprise to anyone that this is a tool with which I am intimately familiar, and I use this a lot when working with my clients. So I wanted to show you how this tool can work for you to strengthen your stories. So one of the things that I love about the Inside Outline is that it is a very simple framework to understand, and in its simplicity comes a lot of power, actually, because it helps you to really distill what's happening in the story so that you are getting the most important critical elements brought to the forefront. So let me explain the rules here. For each scene, we're going to list two different aspects. We're going to have the plot. That's what's happening. You can think about that as being like if we were watching the book unfold as a movie, what we would be seeing on screen. It's what's happening in the scene. And then we have the point, and this is the emotional meaning for the main character. It tells us what happened in the scene made the main character feel a certain way, brought up certain emotions, and that's what we're going to put there under that point. And then we have this because of that trajectory, and because of the way my character is feeling, because of the way that they have had this emotional reaction to what happened in the scene, that's going to drive the character to act in the next scene. And then we start with the next scene and we repeat the same process by pointing out what's going to happen in the next scene and the emotional meaning for the character in that scene. And we will continue with it because of that trajectory to propel us into the next scene. So as you can see, the rules for this tool are very simple and can even be very flexible if you want to use them in a dual timeline or a dual POV, or to track a subplot. Even you can use the Inside Outline in so many different ways. You can use it to help draft your story. You can use it to revise your story. It can be used at all times of the process, which is why it is one of my favorite tools. So I'd like to show you some examples, and I'm going to pull from Pride and Prejudice simply because it's an accessible story to a lot of people. So for instance, if I was looking at the opening scene of Pride and Prejudice, I can talk about Elizabeth Bennet's household, whirs with activity when her family learns that a young, rich, eligible bachelor has moved into an estate in the neighborhood. Mrs. Bennet pesters Mr. Bennet to visit the young man so their daughters can be introduced as potential marriage partners. Mr. Bennet admits he has already met him. And so what is the point for this? Why does it matter to Elizabeth? So Elizabeth is one of 5 daughters of age to be married. She and her sisters must find good matches if they are to maintain their societal standing, because they will not inherit any of their father's estate upon his death. A potential match with a wealthy neighbor would bring great joy and peace of mind to the family. So that's what this scene means to Elizabeth as of right now. And so because of that, we're going to go into the next scene where the Bennet family attends the neighborhood ball. Mrs. Bennet is eager to introduce her daughters to the new Mr. Bingley. The eldest, Jane, immediately gets along with Mr. Bingley. Elizabeth, however, cannot stand Mr. Bingley's proud friend, Mr. Darcy, despite his wealth. So again, we want to look at what does this mean to Elizabeth. Elizabeth is happy for Jane's sake because Mr. Bingley would be a good match, both in status and personality. But Elizabeth refuses to sacrifice her own happiness just to make a good impression on a wealthy, eligible man. She believes there is more to life than a profitable marriage. And because of that, we would move into the next scene. So hopefully you're seeing how you might put the plot and the point within your own outline, and then how because of that trajectory is driving one scene to the next. So I want to talk about some common mistakes that I often see writers doing in their outlines. So the first one is sometimes people mistake what point means, and they think about it more from the scene's function in the book. They're thinking about it more as the author So what I mean by that is, for instance, if you are writing your climax scene under the point, you might say this scene needs to be here because it is the climax of the story. But that's not what we're talking about with the point. We want to remember that the point is what it means to the main character, not what function you are trying to concoct here with this scene as the author of the book. So let me give you an example, again, from Pride and Prejudice. So if we had our opening scene, an incorrect point would be to say, this scene introduces the Bennet family to the reader. The reader learns about the Bennet's predicament and finds out the girls need to marry well to maintain their status. Notice that I'm talking about my viewpoint here as an author, what I'm hoping to convey to the reader to take away from this. That's not how I want to think about the point. I want to think about the point as the emotional reaction from the main character. Another mistake that we see is ignoring the because of that cause and effect trajectory. And you can always spot this because it seems like a bunch of random events are happening. They could happen in any order. It doesn't matter what comes first or if they even are connected in any way. So again, if we look at Pride and Prejudice, an example of ignoring the because of that trajectory, if I had the opening scene and then in the next scene, Elizabeth decides to visit her aunt and uncle in London, and she helps to take care of her nieces and nephews while her aunt is sick. Okay, well, that's super random and has nothing to do with the opening scene with the house all awhir because of this new eligible bachelor coming to town. Another mistake is including a scene in which nothing changes. So you want to remember that your scenes should be small units of change within the larger change of the whole story. So for instance, let's look at an alternative version of an opening scene. So let's suppose Elizabeth and her sisters spend the day working on embroidery and sewing ribbons on hats. They take a midday stroll to buy more ribbons, return home, and finish their hats. Nothing has changed for the sisters. Nothing has really changed at all in this scene. We're just talking about the mundaneness, perhaps, of everyday life. Nothing has changed on an emotional level. Everybody is pretty much the same as when they started. So this is a scene, if you are finding such a scene on your outline, good indication that that scene needs to be cut or something needs to be put in this scene that will make something change. Sometimes we see repetitive scenes. So for instance, this one's going to be a bit over the top. But if I am in the opening scene of Pride and Prejudice, okay, so we have the opening scene, which is scene 1 here. Mr. Bennet comes home to tell the Bennet women he has met a new bachelor moving into town. Well, then if the next scene is Mrs. Bennet returns from town and tells her daughters about another eligible bachelor moving into town. And then in a third scene, I have a neighbor visits the Bennets and tells them her nephew, an eligible bachelor, will be visiting for a couple months. We practically have the same thing happening 3 times in a row. We don't need all of that. So this is an opportunity perhaps for some scenes to be condensed into one. It could be an opportunity for some of these scenes to be cut. It would depend on your story and your situation, but you don't want the same thing happening multiple times in a row. Otherwise, it gives the reader the impression of being stuck in some sort of hamster wheel. And you certainly don't want that. We want a sense of forward momentum. And another mistake is ignoring the stakes of the main character. So you want to make sure that there's always a point for the main character, that what's happening in the story makes an impact on them at an emotional level. So again, if we look at the opening scene from Pride and Prejudice, let's suppose Mr. Bennet comes home to tell the Bennet women that he has met a new bachelor moving to town. Apart from being glad to know the town gossip, none of the women care because they are too busy planning upcoming weddings for Jane and Elizabeth. There's no stakes for the family for Jane or Elizabeth in this scenario. It's just some gossip. It's not going to matter in the grand scheme of things. They don't care about this news. And because they don't care about this news, the reader doesn't care about this news. Okay, so I hope you found this helpful. I do want to point out that you can find more about the inside outline in Jennie's Blueprint for a Book, which is an excellent resource. It's very inexpensive. You can find it off Amazon or other booksellers. And Jennie also provides some free inside outline downloads on her own website that are very helpful. For instance, she also has a checklist that you can work through to make sure that your inside outline is holding up strong. And so I just want to thank you for joining me here for this session, and we will talk to you again another time.